Hello and welcome to another episode of the AIGA Design Podcast. My name is Li Shan Huang, Co-Executive Director of Learning and Programs here at AIGA, the Professional Association for Design. This season on the show, we are exploring the theme of design and performance. And with me, my co-host.
Hi everyone, I'm Julia Donatello, Design Competitions and Event Manager at AIGA.
Our guest this episode is Richard Moross. He is the founder and CEO of MOO, which started as a business card printing company back in 2006, and now MOO designs and sells a whole range of useful branded things, from notebooks to water bottles, and they sell to customers all around the world. MOO is currently one of the fastest growing print companies in the world. It's grown from 35 employees in 2008 to over 450 employees today. In our conversation with Richard, we're going to learn more about his entrepreneurial journey and get his reflections on the theme of this season's show, design and performance. Welcome, Richard.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'd like to start our conversation on the topic of entrepreneurship, and from there we'll get to know more about you and your company, MOO. But we did a little bit of research. On your website, you say that the very best part of being an entrepreneur is working with your team of unconventional and brilliant people who inspire you each and every day. You also mentioned in a 2008 interview with The Economist that before starting MOO, you hadn't thought of yourself as an entrepreneur. You told The Economist, quote, "I was driven by the power of an idea. As soon as I had fully thought through the idea, I was compelled to set up the business. I had no choice but to take my life in this direction. It became an act of self-fulfillment," unquote. So with that context set, could you tell us a bit more about the origin story of MOO, how you came to identify as an entrepreneur through that journey?
Sure. It's the first time anyone has fed a quote back to me in that way, so I have to, kind of think back to what state of mind I was in at the time. But no, the story is true, and the sentiment still rings true today. And I think, when I started the business in its first iteration, I was 25. I had been working in a design company. I'd done a bit of work in a tech startup, and it was all about the idea. I mean, becoming an entrepreneur was the method by which I would make the idea real. So it was about a passion for creating, and the methodology was starting a business. The original idea was very different to what we do today. I guess every journey starts with a single step, and that was the single step. And it was basically about how to create a market for business cards for your social life. Mm-hmm. There's a 500-year-old industry of printing, a sort of 300-year-old industry of printing business cards, and for the history of time, that had been for professionals to give their information to other professionals. But almost all technology at some point, finds its way into the hands of consumers, and consumers repurpose that for their benefit. It just struck me as very strange that there was this tool that had been around for a long time, super functional, doesn't require Wi-Fi or batteries, it's universally understood how it works. Why were consumers not using them? So that was the original idea. The original idea of the business was called Pleasure Cards. We can get into that. Obviously a very strange branding decision, but wanted it to stand out. I became sort of obsessed. It was a moment of passion for trying to make something happen, and became an entrepreneur sort of as a result of that.
That's great. Yeah, curious about this pleasure card name and how you got to MOO. Maybe I can wrap it into the next question, which is like this pivot. So you started from business card printing, and now you do a diverse range of branded merchandise, from notebooks, water bottles, all sorts of things. So can you talk about that pivot from pleasure cards to MOO, but also like expanding your product line?
The pivots were very different and driven by different things, but yeah, we can tackle them one after the other. So the pleasure cards didn't work, right? Mm-hmm. There was no demand for this product. People hated the name. It was doomed to failure. And however, there were little things about the product. It was a print product that it had some technologies that we had invented, and they seemed kind of cool. And this is 2004, 2005. Mm-hmm. And at the same time as me totally failing to launch pleasure cards. Social networks were exploding, blogs were exploding, Skype was coming onto the market. People were playing with technology in new ways, in social ways. So there was the pivot was, let's find a way to try and get this social, hardware product to work with some of these social software products. So the first pivot was into like, how can we find social networks? How can we latch on to high growth opportunities and kill pleasure cards dead, but kind of take some of the things that were really cool about it and work with some of these social networks to bring it to life in a different way. So that's how MOO was initially born. I think once we'd proven that out, we can talk about partnerships we did and the ways in which we grew the business, but ultimately we talk about our kind of mission today. It's about helping bring brands to life, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we did that in a 28 by 70 millimeter, rectangle in these little cards that we launched with. We did that very successfully with business cards and other things. As we moved and expanded into paper, we were like, oh, there are other challenges that we're quite interested in too. There's big markets in things like branded merchandise. How would we do that differently? What would we do to disrupt and innovate in those spaces? So I guess it's a natural expansion and a natural curiosity that we as entrepreneurs sort of have to try and do that. And a great way to grow and expand a business, obviously, is seek other categories out. But so two different pivots. One was based on survival. Like this is dying, we have to change it. The other based on opportunity and actually kind of an enthusiasm for building and expanding and growing.
Right. So it sounds like you've we're learning from your potential customers, pivoting along the way. As follow-up, I actually wanted to rewind a little bit more. Mm-hmm. So folks have been talking about print being dead for decades now. It's mostly about print journalism, and that's a whole different discussion. But obviously there's still plenty of surfaces that we print on, whether for branded merchandise or packaging, all sorts of stuff. So print is still big in that sense, but it's perhaps considered a legacy industry, although you have innovated in MOO in terms of your model. But when you were starting up, how did you convince investors to take a chance on a printing business?
So again, I think this is probably two other pivots to talk about, which are very interesting. I think initially, print has, as I said, since Gutenberg, had a business model, right? Mm-hmm. You raw materials, you have machines, and you're able to turn that into something super functional, super useful. So when social networks were looking for a way to monetize their business before the advertising models came along, and they kind of grew and grew from there, we were talking to social networks and blogs and kind of these startup businesses said, we can help you sell this to your customers. So some of the early ones, we did a deal with Flickr, was our first deal. So it was photographers who were using Flickr to share their photos online, a lot of professional photographers. So this was a way for Flickr to generate direct revenue and for us to generate direct revenue from customers by putting their photos on our products. We shared revenue with Flickr and with Yahoo, who owned them at the time. And then we just rolled that out to blogging platforms. And, we did a deal with Bebo, if you remember that. So young kids social networks, so young person social networks, we did it with 6 Apart and some of the kind of early blogging software businesses. So, we tried in a lot of different places. We did it with Skype as well, kind of a way to share your Skype ID so that you could easily communicate with people. So that was a very easy sell to investors because we said, we have a business model and you have all these social networks over here. If we can go and do deals with them, we can bring them money, we can bring ourselves money. We were part of an ecosystem of growing and exciting businesses with a lot of potential. So that was the kind of first compelling narrative that became apparent. I think now it's almost the opposite of that in a sort of interesting way. The value, paper and printed products, when done for the lowest possible cost and expressed as an item of practically zero value, are obsolete. When you can send an email at a fraction of that cost and people are going to ignore it anyway, why make something that's a commodity that people aren't going to see? It's like spam, right? No one reads spam. And I think people don't read junk mail that gets put through your door. At the same time, because of all this spam, because of all this digital, very low cost of digital communications, making beautiful, high quality physical things cuts through. People notice them. Oh, what's this nice card? What's this nice gift that you bought me that you put kind of the brand on? So I think in a world of a lot of digital noise, analog is a really powerful signal that people can latch onto and use. So we're lucky that we're in the kind of high quality print, the premium print end of the spectrum. We care about those details. And we think we're quite good at, discovering them and innovating and making nice things. that kind of stuff cuts through. So we think it's for very different reasons, we're a highly sort of valuable and investable business today, because we make stuff that you can't send in an email. You can't send to 10,000 people with a touch of a button. It has to be special. It has to be valuable. It has to cut through. So, yeah, a lot of difference between those two eras and 20 years of time.
Right. Yeah.
It's been an interesting journey to get from there to here.
Yeah, I love it. I love to hear your journey, and also like how you started your concept and where you are now. That's great. That's great. So Richard, referring back to the quote that Vishan mentioned earlier about your team being unconventional and brilliant people, I'm also interested to hear more if you have any advice on how to build a team, and how are you able to see those brilliant and unconventional people in a hiring process, and also how are you able to maintain the culture of the company when you're scaling from 35 people to 450 plus, right?
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, a few questions in there, and I don't know whether I have the right answer to any of them, but I can tell you my experience and what we did and what worked and what didn't work. The culture is obviously extremely important, and values are extremely important, and they're going to drive, performance ultimately. So you have to care about those things. You have to focus on them. There have to be consequences, good and bad, for people living the culture or not living the culture. And the more that those are codified and part of daily life, you'll see it reflected in the performance of a business, and you need to see it reflected in people who rise and fall within your organization. I think that what that culture is, what those values are, and how that comes to life is very different when you're a 10-person company than you're a 100-person company, or a 400-person company, or 1,000 or 10,000. And I think that doing it for the first time, I was helped. I mean, the honest answer to the question is, I don't think I'm greatly responsible for the culture of the business over the years. I think I've been helped by having experienced and senior people around me. I'm probably personally responsible for the heart of the business, like the drumbeat, but also like making sure we do things in the right way, that things are aligned with my personal values as opposed to my professional values, like what I think things are, morally, ethically right to do or not. But I just had great people. We had venture capital investors, and still do. They are extremely helpful at helping you attract talent, helping you find them and convince them to come into the business. Their endorsement helps you find people that would otherwise never come to your tiny business with no revenue. I think it's a really powerful and helpful thing. So that was extremely helpful. And then as we've grown, I think, the whatever the quote of brilliant weirdos or whatever it was that I may have said before was actually something along the lines of what I had heard when I worked for a design company called Imagination here in London. And I think they published a book many years ago, and I think that they had called it Brilliant Weirdos, or, kind of nerdy something or other. There was this nice combination of obviously talent, but, didn't fit into the box. They weren't necessarily, a Harvard MBA, they more of a street fighter type of mentality than a super professional. And with that might come all sorts of quirks and things, but I think that those are characterful. You want people with, diverse backgrounds. You want people who have different experiences that they can, one joins the business, adds to the flavor and the kind of diversity and the quality of the work. So yeah, for the most part, it's people have helped me along the way. I've been very, very lucky to have a strong team, throughout. Different team, doing different things, but always strong.
Awesome. Very cool. And speaking of culture of the company and so on, I was thinking, like, more on a personal note. I've been working remotely, pretty much fully remote for the past 5 years. And before that was fully in person. And now I've seen many companies either going fully back to the office, or some still keeping the hybrid model. I know you have reached the moment where you're in the hybrid work model. I wanted to hear more from you. How do you keep this culture, the team spirit, and making sure you create cohesion and that the communication is smooth, and still keeping and maintaining the culture with such a work model?
It's very hard.
Yeah.
I think hybrid is the hardest. You described it just now. It's very binary, these worlds. You're either at home, you're at work. to have a mix of those two things is hard because you need to invest in both those things. You need to invest in the office and you need to invest in the remote tools. And you need to have some form of, equitability across your teams and your culture and your geographies and so on. So I guess our final decision on hybrid stems from the fact that we make products that are for people to hand out in person. They're physical things, right? They exist in the physical world. We're not a software-only business. We do software, manufacturing, design. We do all of these things in-house. So as we design things for customers that are physical, that are used to help customers to network or to build their relationships in person, I think it would be crazy for us to be a virtual business. And if you add the fact that we have factories and we have, physical goods flowing through our business, I think we were always going to have an element of in-person. What we landed on was kind of 40% minimum, so 2 days a week in the office and the rest people can work from. That's dependent on the type of role that people have, but that's, I'd say, the average across people who are not doing a factory job. So that stands for, people who are working in the service teams, people who are working in design, people working in engineering. We have a pretty big remote population as well. I think I'm going to guess about 80 or 100 people maybe are remote in the business. So and all of our manufacturing people are in 5 days a week, at least.
Yeah.
Sure.
Because they have to be.
Yeah.
There's no
You can't run the machine from remotely. Yeah.
From
So
home,
I think it's exactly, we'd have to buy everyone a new house to fit all the machines in them, which would be impractical. So I think that, like I go to a gym. Sometimes I can work out at home. It's helpful, I think, to have if you use a trainer every once in a while to help you perfect your form. I think going to the office helps build that in-person mentoring and learning in person, I think, can be much easier. So we've settled on a ratio that works for us today. That may change in the future, but I think we're pretty happy with where we are with it.
Great. Yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah, I wanted to take this culture conversation in another direction as it relates back to the brand at MOO. So I'm going to quote you again, but in 2021, there's an interview with you on the MOO website. You mentioned back then that you didn't have a motto, but it seems like you've found one since then. Maybe it's a motto, great design for everyone, which is something you have on both the MOO website and your personal website. So can you tell us more about this vision of great design for everyone and what that means for you?
Sure. So I would call it a purpose, which is why if someone asked me about a motto, and I would, it's like we don't have like a one for all and all for one, kind of Musketeers type motto. Great design for everyone is something that form of words that we came across and committed to in the first few years of the business, and it was trying to express kind of the DNA, the belief system of the business, like, believing in democracy or believing in whatever. Mm-hmm. It's not a business strategy. It's not a mission statement. It's much more, I suppose I can unpack it and explain what it means to me, but we think of it as a kind of a purpose and a belief system. Okay. So I can tell you where it came from. So before I started the business, I graduated from university in 2000. I went to work for a design company, first for a technology company, a tech startup for a couple of years. Then I went to work for a design company for a couple of years, and I founded MOO in 2004 after having worked for about 4 years. And my sort of desire of what I wanted to build and how I wanted to build it was born out of frustrations from both of those two worlds initially. I had loved working in a tech business, but it was all kind of, everything was quite scruffy and not very functional. It was the world's our oyster and technology is going to eat everything, but it wasn't particularly aesthetically interesting to me. Yeah. And then spending time in the design world, everything's beautifully aesthetically interesting, but it might be very expensive. It might be hard to, think about how anyone could afford this stuff. It was for an elite audience. So great design for everyone means that we believe in trying to break down the boundaries of design. Like design is a process, it's a product, it's an outcome, it's a way of thinking, a lot of different things. But fundamentally, we want to use technology, we want to use our manufacturing innovation to make design more accessible for people. That means maintaining standards and quality, that means innovating, but it also means trying to lower the price, trying to lower the barriers for people to try and use these products. Mm-hmm. So I could give you an example for another industry. This may not be the best example, but something like Starbucks is an attempt to make espresso-based drinks something that everyone drinks. And Howard Schultz very, very successfully executed this vision after having visited a a coffee fair in Milan when he was working in the business in the very early days of that company. How do you create a scalable, high quality, you can argue whether Starbucks is high quality versus other things, but it is a premium product versus, an instant coffee, for example. So what great design for everyone means, or what great coffee for everyone means, to make that up for Starbucks, I know that's not their slogan, is us just breaking down the boundaries, helping more people get access to the types of design that we sell, and trying to do that in an affordable way, but having a premium product at the end.
Yeah. There's an interesting tension to that. Right? Because there's like great design for everyone. There's great design which is about quality. Sometimes that's used as a proxy for just a higher price or even like exclusivity, right? And that's one of the kind of sins in the design world. There's often this kind of elite snootiness to things. And then on the other hand, you have the for everyone, which is about scale. And sometimes you do need to make compromises to keep things, below a certain price point or whatnot. So yeah, like what are your approaches at MOO for maintaining this quality at scale, since you have grown to this global scale?
So I think that it's a great question. There is that tension, of course. And I mean, IKEA has this nice thing where the first thing on the page is the price it's going to sell for. I mean, that really focuses the mind when you have to design a sofa for $50 or something. For us, maybe it's similar. Like, here are a range of price points we can design for. They're going to start at super accessible. What's the best thing we can do at that price point? Not necessarily how we're going to make the most money, but what can we make that we'll be proud of, that we can deliver at this price point using the best materials. But also, what can we do at this higher price point? What can we deliver at 2 or 3 times that price? But it's a tension we deal with all the time. I suppose I want to challenge some of what's behind your question, and make for an interesting conversation. I think a lot of the design should be popular. Right? Yeah. I think design should be enjoyed. I think it should be something that many people have access to, whether that's renting, visiting, owning, on all those different levels. I think designing something that is for very few people, maybe it makes me feel a bit sad that that it's so exclusive. And I think there's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing around, is it starting with the price? We're going to make this inaccessible and then we're going to build something around that, or is it, the kind of a Veblen effect where it's like pricing is the exclusivity, like we're just going to price people out of the market with this thing. Or, you see a lot of fashion brands like burning their stock at the end of the year to reduce the amount of stock on the market. There's no resale of these things. We're going to burn them. And I just think that's terribly sad and wasteful. So I think great design should be for the mainstream. I think that to innovate in that space, you have to be clever about what materials you're using. You have to be clever about your logistics. You have to be clever about manufacturing and supply chain, increasingly so in the world we live in today. But I have a populist view on this, and I believe that design is a thing we should all be able to enjoy. And the cheapest new products, $5-10, it's super accessible.
Totally.
So yeah, but this tension is with us always, for sure.
Yeah.
Getting back to the idea of the tension and the choices behind when you design your products, I'm also curious to hear from you how you elaborate your own personal relationship with design, and how did you get interested in design in the first place? So before you founded your own company.
Sure. Well, I probably didn't think about it as design much. My grandfather was an architect, and we used to visit him every year. And he had built his own kind of mid-century house filled with furniture from the era. I remember sitting on his kind of Eames lounge chair and ottoman and just being like, I really like this thing. I don't know why I like it, but I really like it. As a 7-year-old, 6-year-old kid, and being in this space that was different to other houses because it was designed by him and in a geography that he had tailored for the house itself. So kind of my first experience even thinking about design was of architecture and architectural spaces and furniture. Passion for design probably manifested through film more so than through product design or other things, or graphic design, or maybe graphic design in films. I remember as a kid I was an obsessive collector of films, and probably still am, and watching things like John Carpenter movies from the 70s and seeing this very kind of auteur mindset. We could call John Carpenter's the thing. He's going to have his name above it, like Zuckerberg's Facebook, in the early days. And he would design the music, and he would write the film, and he would shoot the film, and he would produce it. And it was this amazing. The film is a sort of multidisciplinary design exercise with ultimate control. Just thought, was fascinated by that. And I suppose that's somewhat correlates to my interest in entrepreneurship, because if you are a bit of a control freak, it's the perfect career for you, being able to influence all the different things, kind of around you. Film was probably the first thing that I got into, and made me think about design or designing things.
Right. Yeah, your answer kind of has me thinking about this blurring of boundaries, right? Because it's like creating a company as an entrepreneur, growing that company is like the ultimate design project, right? Because it's not just about like the individual product or service that you're crafting, but there's the whole business model behind it and making sure that you can stay in business and grow and all of that, as you were saying, like similar to film, right? Because all of these great auteurs are not just artists. They have to get millions of dollars just to make the film and have this huge team that they have to manage to make it.
Yep.
So I wanted to turn to the theme of the season of the podcast, which is design and performance. And we've had guests look at this in different ways. This interview is a kind of performance, but also we could talk about like business performance, a high performing team in the context of MOO, or your own performance as a leader. So this is an open-ended question for you to interpret design and performance in your own way and riff on it. And if you have anything to share with our listeners or our viewers, if folks are watching this on YouTube. Yeah.
I was thinking about this, and I was thinking about film and running a business. And I was thinking about it when I was thinking about performance in particular. There was a scene from a documentary that I watched, which I think is my favorite like, there aren't a lot of films or documentaries that show you into the boardroom in a company.
Yeah.
They fictionalize those things, right? There aren't a lot of films that show you a creative team meeting in a company, or a decision meeting, or a executive meeting, because they want to be secretive about that stuff, and it's very messy often. So I think about performance, particularly at MOO, as being about being able to we're vertically integrated, right? We manufacture our products, we decorate them, we're the printer, right? But we also design our products, we're the design company, it's all in-house. We do all the customer service in-house, we design all the technology in-house, a full stack, business. And the secret to being successful is being able to bring all of those disciplines together and make it work. Not just make it work like we can physically make the product, but make it work like the margin is good, there's demand from the customer, we know how to market it, it's good for the planet. There's 25 things that need to come together. There's no way you can do that without true collaboration. So I was just thinking about this. There's a fantastic documentary called Sound City, which is about a recording studio in California that Fleetwood Mac recorded Rumours in, that Nirvana recorded Nevermind in. And Dave Grohl produced this documentary, and there's a scene where Dave Grohl, Josh Homme from Brain Is Gone, Queens of the Stone Age, and Trent Reznor write a song together. You have three independent musicians, superstars, soloists, leaders of their bands come together and write a song. One on the piano, one on the bass, one on the guitar, and singing.
Amazing.
And the respect and the skills and the collaboration, it's just incredible. And I think when I think about how when we think about performance at MOO, we think about, what do we need to do to be successful? It is about how do you bring all those disciplines together so that you can make this beautiful music, or, you roll the analogy out however you like. But there's no way that we can be successful as a business without having our drummer and our guitarist and our,
totally
all come together and do their thing in time with everyone else, right? In a complementary way to everyone else. So I love the musical analogy, and that's another kind of like high performing weirdos, that's music all over, right? That is exactly what it's about. You've got really, really strong performers, but they have to be able to play as a band, basically.
Yeah, that also reminds me, this is another recommendation for our listeners, our viewers, the Beatles documentary series, Get Back, the Peter Jackson one, right, where they're just like jamming in the studio for the Let It Be album, and I think it's like Paul McCartney starts something and they all, like McCartney
starts playing Get Back.
Yeah,
And
you
he doesn't know the
literally
words
see,
yet. He's just going, and you see music get written in front of you. You see, what you perceive to be genius, and it is genius, but it's so, in a way, it's so banal. It's just him playing on the guitar, but you sort of see the song pour out of him that you've heard a million times. It's just amazing. Incredible.
Yeah, very organically designed, no?
Yeah.
So, Richard, still speaking of performance, can you share with us what has been the best failure or some type of unexpected outcome that taught you about performance?
Yeah, I think that the best failure is probably launching business cards. So, I mean, that sounds strange, but I'll explain it to you. So when we started, we were the anti-business card. We were the personal card or the pleasure card. And we wanted nothing to do with business cards because they were boring and they were traditional, and why would we do that? And that was in the early days. And when we started moving into working with social networks and being a B2C brand, working with Skype, working with Flickr, working with these guys. One of our investors quite rightly said to us, you're going to do business cards at some point. And we'd been selling all these weird products. So we sold these little skinny mini cards, we made these funny note cards and sticker books. These were all products that were very cool and very, very different, but no one was looking for them. No one was going onto Google and saying, what I really need is a funny shaped card. There was no like keyword searches for these products. And I was incredibly resistant to doing a business card because it was like selling out. To go back to the music, it's like trying to write your second album that sounded like the first album. It wasn't different, wasn't new. And when I finally kind of capitulated and said, okay, we'll do it, but we'll do it in our way, and we'll make a beautiful recycled paper and put it in we'll make a beautiful box. The boxes were different, but same kind of idea, beautiful packaging, and we'll tell this story in our own way. Basically, the sales doubled overnight and just kept growing because finally we had all of the DNA of a product business that knew how to design remarkable, different, beautiful things, finally selling products that people also wanted and needed. So it was a very important learning for me. I think my values were very anti-business cards, and in the basically deciding that we were going to try it after having a lot of pressure put on me was the best decision we could have made as a business. I guess it was a failure. It was a failure that we didn't do it sooner, probably, looking back. But it was that transformed the business success.
Very cool.
Another angle to explore this performance theme is about your personal rituals or habits as a leader. Do you have any of those that are like maybe daily or weekly? It could be any sort of time scale, but what are they? How did you develop them?
Yeah, none I want to share. I think, look, we're a bunch of weirdos, right?
Yeah.
Entrepreneurs are a little bit weird. And also, I'm often very wary of giving advice because I think every journey is different and every person is different. I think the biggest hack at doing this is really, and I know it's super obvious, it's a super obvious thing to say, but it's doing something in a space you actually care about, that you're interested in. I think there are a lot of very smart people who will be very successful who are going into spaces that are exciting or have value to them. There's a lot of hype, let's say AI, pick AI, for no reason other than the fact that it is big at the moment. And people opportunistically going into that space and saying that they're going to build an AI business, which is fine. But when it gets hard and when it, if that's not your passion or it's not your skill, it's going to be so much harder. And it's always hard, right? For 99.9% of people, it's very hard. Most businesses fail. 2/3 of businesses go out of business in the first couple of years. So pick something you really care about. You'll work so much harder on it and care so much more about it. I suppose the thing you need to avoid is the thing that I was doing, which was being too belligerent about executing your vision in a certain way and not being wise to commercial opportunities when they're there. But, I really care about what we do and what we make. It's a passion of mine as a consumer and as a business person. I think this journey, I would have packed it in a long time ago, I think, if it was something I wasn't passionate about. So very, very, very lucky to be doing something that I care about.
Yeah. And as that sort of continuing that momentum, are there places where you go for inspiration? How do you stay innovative and up to date?
Yeah, I go shopping. I go shopping a lot.
Yeah.
Not to buy anything. I'm a real window shopper. So I go to the stores, when I visit other countries, I love going to the shops to see what's the supermarkets. My favorite,
Yeah.
probably, like, what's the branding like in this store? Like, what food, you know, like, I remember going to, this is a few years back, just tiny little things. I remember going to a tiny supermarket in Italy, and they had organized the food in the supermarket by the miles it traveled to the supermarket.
Wow.
There's a tiny little detail. It was just so interesting. Like,
Yeah.
the tomatoes were at the front because they'd come from down there. It was like, I'm not saying this is like a big thing. It was just the first time I'd ever seen it. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, that's really interesting. So I love going to the shops. I love travel as well. So I love going and looking in the windows of stores in other countries, particularly going to Asia, where in my business, in the stationery business, there's a lot going on and a lot to be inspired by. So yeah, or shopping online. I'm an incessant bookmarker and record keeper. You know, I bookmark millions and millions of things to go back and to rediscover later.
Yeah, I'm with you on the supermarket thing. I was in Portugal on vacation last month, and we just went to the supermarket, not because we needed anything, but it was just to see, like, okay, how do people here shop? How do they live?
And then culture's represented in what you eat. You know, is it a bunch of stuff in the freezer, or is it all whole foods that people are chopping up and turning into dinner every night? Like, you'll learn a lot about a country by what a supermarket looks like.
For sure.
So to wrap up our conversation today, we wanted to hear your recommendation for our listeners, and that could be a book, a show, a movie, or some other type of media that you would like to share that has inspired your process.
Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely. So I think, given my early passion for film, I think it'd have to be a film. Can I cheat and give you a double bill?
Yeah, totally.
Like
Yes, of course.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
and we'll post links to all of these too, but it's helpful to hear from you. Yeah.
I think one of the most amazing films I have ever seen is The Holy Mountain by Alejandro Jodorowsky. It is an insane, massive budget, crazy designer's fantasy. It is beautiful and shocking and weird and insane. And I would double bill it with Jodorowsky's Dune, which is the story of how he nearly made the film Dune, which David Lynch went on to make and subsequently has been remade again recently. Watching the finished version of his masterpiece in The Holy Mountain is an incredible thing. And then watching his process as a filmmaker and watching him try to raise money and try to get, you know, a Pink Floyd to do soundtrack and trying to get all these amazing people involved in film. It is like watching or hearing a story about a startup with a crazy founder. So I think those two films, Holy Mountain is an amazing film for designers to watch because it's just so rich and filled with incredible visual imagery. And then watching the documentary about Dune and how hard it is to actually do these things, I think it's an inspirational double bill. Watch late at night. I think that they're a good pair to put together.
Wonderful.
Awesome.
And to finally wrap us up, Richard, we'd love to give you the opportunity to do a call to action. Folks just share their links, whatever they want to do. Of course, we'll post links to the show notes as well, but it's helpful to hear from you or see from you. So yeah, where can folks go to learn more about you, your work at MOO, or other things that you want to get people to go to?
I have so little social media presence. I don't think I have insights really worth following. Well, we'll see. Maybe the MOO blog. People can go check out the MOO blog or just check out moo.com and have a look at what we do.
Awesome. Richard Moross, thank you so much for spending some time with us today on the AIGA Design Podcast. And thank you all for listening or watching. Please subscribe and review us or send us a voicemail as well. We'd love to hear from you. I'm Lishan Huang. Until next time.